Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to MALN Opinion Plus, a weekly series airing every Friday. This is a space for our opinions where we talk about current events and questions the Latino community is curious about. Today, we are joined by Commissioner Samantha Aigner-Treworgy of Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care. She began her role as Commissioner in 2019 and previously served as Chief of Early Learning for the City of Chicago for 3 years. Welcome to our show, Sam, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much. It's so great to be here with you today.
Of course, it's a pleasure. I was hoping we could start off sort of talking about how the pandemic has impacted early education throughout the state.
Absolutely. Like every field and industry and service, early education has been impacted profoundly by the pandemic, and really in some critical ways. I think, first of all of the strategies we know to support young children rely on in-person engagement. We know that young children learn from supportive, emotionally responsive, language-rich engagements with adults and their peers. And as we have had to move away from, and families moving away from using group care settings, we've really had to figure out new ways to try to ensure that children were still getting those really high impact experiences that put them on the path to success from the start.
Right, absolutely. Could you go into a little bit of what types of resources have you noticed families have needed throughout 2020 and entering this year?
Absolutely. Families are spending more time with their children than they ever have before, and that's required a number of different resources. First of all, I want to just say how remarkable it has been to watch communities come together and provide resources, basic need resources for families who are struggling. Many families who are struggling with adequate food, making sure that having lost their jobs or shifts in the kind of services they might usually rely on. It has been just really inspiring to watch communities come together, think critically about how to deliver these services differently, how to help families access them safely, but also aside from just the basic needs, families need resources to be their children's first and most important teacher as well, and make sure that they are able to provide the kind of fun and joyous learning experiences that children would have gotten if we were in non-pandemic times. And so children respond to what is around them. And so the more opportunities and the more resources that we've been able to provide families to be able to engage with their children joyously means that children are really still learning and staying on track during this time.
Right. Thank you for that great explanation. And I'm wondering now, how has the pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis, commonly affected childcare programs, residential facilities, sort of foster care, and adoption agencies? What has been the greatest impacts in those?
Absolutely. I think it's in some has been for every care setting is just learning the new protocols, the new operational requirements, making sure that that you are getting the right kind of attestations from visitors to make sure they haven't had symptoms, making sure you're protecting your facilities and your spaces has really been a universal pivot to every kind of service and care provider throughout the Commonwealth and the country. For childcare specifically, and it has been highlighted as a critical infrastructure that is necessary for recovery. This has really exposed a lot of vulnerability and fragility in the landscape. We have lost almost 20% of our childcare landscape, our childcare providers as we've recovered, and really the increased operational costs to keep their spaces safe combined with the decreased resources coming in with families using childcare inconsistently, particularly as they are trying to avoid group settings, and this has been a hit on childcare revenue that it wasn't prepared to take. And I think what we have to do now is figure out how we keep it stable, how we keep this critical public good resource stable in a way that when families do need to rely on it again, it's still there and able to care for their children when they go back to work.
Thank you for that. That leads to my next question. I'll probably blend in with that, which is, in your opinion, what do you think EEC and other child-related divisions, what should they most focus on once we gradually recover from the pandemic's impacts, as we're moving past the COVID-19 pandemic?
Absolutely. There are a couple things I think we need to focus on. And the first is something that we are working on and have been talking about publicly to try to make sure we're making the best decisions possible. And that is financing, making sure that the funding that the federal government has given the Commonwealth is given to childcare providers in a way that will allow them to stabilize and stay open and not be on the brink of closure for the next year as we see our way on a path to recovery. But I think critically important is making sure that those services and those stable programs are also investing in the staff. We know that over almost half of the workforce for early care and education are women of color. And we know that they are largely making inadequate wages for the kind of work we're relying on them to do. And so ensuring as we come back from recovery that we're focusing, as we come through recovery, that we are focusing on adequately compensating our frontline workers, those providers, those educators who've been coming to work and caring for our children and will do so on the other side of this crisis, that they have the resources to be able to be the present, responsive caregivers that we need for them, for our young children, to continue to get an education during this really critical moment in time.
Right. Thank you for bringing that up. That's a very interesting point. I didn't even think about that, of who exactly this is impacting. It really comes down to demographics at times. But I was wondering if we can talk about biggest goals you have for early education across the state for EEC in terms of maybe a smaller scale, because we're talking bigger scale in the future, sort of projects, upcoming events you like to share, things in the near future.
Absolutely. I think there are a couple of things that are our biggest objective. So certainly we launched a strategic plan the day that we went into a state of emergency as the Commonwealth. And so we've been revisiting that and making sure we're still on track for the larger vision for this field. And so making sure we still continue to address the over 400,000 families that were already living in low-income households, our children who were living in low-income households prior to the pandemic, and knowing that making sure they have access to care, that it's affordable, and that it's the kind of quality that they can rely on to be able to fuel their children's future. So a couple very concrete ways we're doing that is making sure we can overhaul our subsidized childcare tuition. We subsidize about 55,000 families a year to be able to access childcare, and making sure that continues to be accessible for families, even though their reality have changed. And also working with our programs and our providers to ensure they have the resources to deliver the kind of high quality services that they know they want to provide for children. So that means making sure there are coaches and mental health consultants available to support our programs, as well as making sure they have the financial resources to make the investments in staff that are so important to the future of our Commonwealth.
Right, thank you. How would you suggest residents can get involved, stay updated with the EEC and upcoming news projects, seeing where all this leads to.
Absolutely. We do have a newsletter, and so if you go to mass.gov/EEC, you will be able to get to our newsletter and stay up to date on all of the resources we're putting out to the field, as well as making sure that you're keeping in touch with some of the broader coalitions. There are strategies for children and Common Start Coalition, a lot of coalitions discussing issues that I think it's helpful to have voices that represent a variety of different stakeholders as we look at our investments in this critical infrastructure, listening to those voices to make sure we're making decisions that impact the most people and with the most good possible.
Right, absolutely. And so kind of going off of that, what do you think is the importance then of community engagement, of feedback, and how I know it can be rough, especially during the COVID-19 crisis, having that communication, staying connected with this community?
Absolutely.
What do you think your experience with that?
I will say I grew up in Massachusetts, but I moved back for this job in August of 2019, and so was a short 5.5 months before headed into a pandemic. And so I will say that one of the most remarkable things that I have seen in this pandemic is the voice of the communities advocating for what they need and helping guide EEC's work to make sure that we are responsive and supportive to that community need. Quite frankly, we can't do our work without community engagement and without the information from the community and understanding how we can support them. And so we have spent a fair amount of time building some systems to make sure the voice of the community can be actively incorporated into our decision making. And again, if you go to our website at mass.gov/EEC, there is a link to our strategic engagement portal that are offering us an opportunity to have voices from the community real time as part of our decision-making process, which is helping us make better decisions and ensure that they can really have the impact we intend.
Right. We're running a bit out of time, but I know you have so many resources and information. Is there anything else before we go off that you would like to share, whether it's the next event coming up? I talked to you guys obviously online, and you have a lot of interesting virtual events going on this year.
We definitely do, and there's something for everyone and every perspective. So we really do encourage you to go to our website and mass.gov/EEC, look at the strategic plan and help us make sure that we are operationalizing it in a way that will be meaningful to children and families, educators, providers, and all of those who rely on EEC to make sure that you are serving your communities and serving your children.
That's an amazing thing. Thank you so much for your time and for your expertise and talking with us, Commissioner Aigner-Treworgy, and for being our guest on MALN Opinion Plus.
Thank you for all the work you're doing of informing the community and really looking forward to our continued engagement.
Of course, it's been a pleasure. Take care. Thank you. Everyone, please tune in next week for another episode. Follow us on Twitter at MA Latino News and Instagram at MA_Latino News. I'm Belen Dumont with MALN Opinion Plus, and I will see you all next time.